They say blood is thicker than water, but in my house it was thinner than a hospital gown.
I was lying there, prepping for a surgery that would decide if I'd ever walk again, while my father was miles away, catering to my twin sister's emergency broken fingernail. I thought I was alone in that cold room, until my grandmother walked in, clutching an old leather envelope. What she said next didn't just break the silence, it shattered our entire family dynamic forever. Silence has a specific sound. In a hospital, it's a mix of distant beeping and the hum of air conditioning. My name is Lily Rose, and for 22 years, I lived in the shadow of a mirror image. My twin Elena was the golden child, the one whose every sniffle was treated like a national crisis. Me, I was the sturdy one, the one who didn't need help, until I did. The accident happened on a rainy Tuesday. A hydroplaning truck, a scream of metal, and suddenly my spine was a puzzle that needed reassembling. The doctors were hopeful but blunt. Surgery was the only way, and the recovery would be grueling. I needed family. I needed my dad. But when I called him from the pre-op ward, his voice sounded hurried, annoyed even. "Lily, I really can't talk right now. Elena is devastated. She just found out she didn't get that influencer brand deal she wanted, and she's locked herself in her room. I need to be here for her." "Dad," I whispered, the plastic oxygen tube itching my nose. "I'm going under the knife in 4 hours. They're literally cutting into my back." "You're strong, Lily. You've always been the independent one. Elena is fragile. Just call me when you're out, okay?" Click. The dial tone was the coldest thing I'd ever felt. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how two people born at the same time could be worlds apart in a father's heart. Before we dive deeper into what happened when the doors swung open, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from, and what time is it for you right now? Let me know in the comments below. An hour before the surgeons came for me, the door to my room creaked open. It wasn't my father. It was my grandmother, Clara. She looked small in that big room, but her eyes were burning with a fire I hadn't seen in years. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I felt. She just walked over to my bedside, took my hand, and placed an old, yellowed envelope on my lap. "Your father isn't coming, is he?" she asked, her voice like gravel and silk. "He's with Elena," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's having a hard day." Grandmother Clara let out a sharp, cynical laugh. "A hard day? Well, he's about to have a very hard life. Lily, there's something you need to read before they take you back there. Something that proves you owe that man nothing, and he owes you everything." My hands shook as I broke the wax seal on the envelope. Inside wasn't a letter. It was a legal document dated 20 years ago, a trust fund agreement, and a confession letter written by my late mother. As my eyes scanned the lines, the hospital room seemed to tilt. The fragile Elena wasn't the one who needed protection. My father had been playing a game of favoritism, fueled by a lie that involved my mother's inheritance, and a secret he thought he'd buried with her. The weight of the paper felt heavier than the hospital bed itself. As I pulled out the document, my grandmother leaned in, her eyes fixed on the door as if guarding a vault. "Read the third paragraph, Lily," she whispered. "Read it carefully." My eyes blurred for a second, before the words snapped into focus. It wasn't just a trust fund, it was a conditional inheritance left by my mother, Sarah. The document stated that the family estate and the bulk of my mother's life insurance were to be divided equally. But there was a specific clause. The funds were only accessible once both twins reached 21, provided that the primary caregiver, my father, maintained an equitable and documented standard of support for both children. But that wasn't the shocker. Tucked behind the legal jargon was a handwritten note from my mother, penned just weeks before she passed away. "To my dearest Lily," it began. "If you are reading this, it means your father has failed the test I set for him." I saw the way he looked at Elena, as a prize, and the way he looked at you, as a reminder of the strength he lacked. He thinks Elena is the key to the family fortune because she looks so much like his side of the family. But he's wrong. The house, the land, and the accounts are legally tied to the child who carries my bloodline's medical marker. Elena is his, Lily, but you are the sole heir to the Rose lineage. I gasped, the heart monitor beside me spiking in a frantic rhythm. What does this mean, Grandma? Elena is his? Clara took a deep breath. Your mother was already pregnant when she met your father, Lily. She was carrying you. Elena came later, a surprise twin from a different biological father. It's rare, but it happened. Your mother kept it a secret to protect you, but she left this trail because she knew your father's vanity would lead him to favor the child he thought was purely his. He spent 20 years coddling Elena, thinking she was the one who would inherit the Rose millions. He's been investing in her, while neglecting you, thinking you were just the extra child. The irony was sickening. My father had spent 2 decades ignoring me because he thought I was the outsider, when in reality, I was the only one who actually owned the roof over his head. Every cent he had spent on Elena's designer clothes and emergencies had been illegally pulled from a fund that belonged entirely to me. He thinks that by staying with her today, he's securing his future, Grandma Clara said, a cold smile playing on her lips. He doesn't know I've already contacted the estate lawyers, and he doesn't know that the moment you go into that surgery, I'm heading to the house to serve him papers. Just then my phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from my father. Elena is finally sleeping. Hope the surgery goes fast. Don't expect me there for recovery. I need to take her to a spa retreat to clear her head. You understand. I looked at my grandmother. Give me the pen, I said. I want to sign the authorization for the forensic audit before they wheel me out. As the nurses entered the room to start my IV and prep me for the OR, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. The physical pain in my back was still there, but the weight of being the second-best daughter had vanished. Grandma, I called out as they began to push my bed toward the double doors. When you see them, tell them I hope the spa is worth the price of a house. The anesthesia was a heavy, dark curtain falling over my eyes, but as I drifted off, I wasn't thinking about the scalpels or the recovery. I was thinking about the look on my father's face when he realized he'd spent 20 years betting on the wrong horse. When I finally blinked my eyes open, the world was a hazy blur of white lights and the muffled sound of a television in the corner. My back felt like it had been fused with lead, but the first thing I saw wasn't a doctor. It was Grandma Clara, sitting in the armchair, sipping a cup of terrible hospital coffee with a look of absolute triumph. It's done, she said, her voice cutting through my grogginess. The doctors say you're going to walk, Lily, and the lawyers, they say you're going to run, straight into a very comfortable life. While I had been under the knife, the real surgery had been happening at our family home. My grandmother hadn't just served papers. She had brought the estate's lead auditor and a moving crew. Tell me everything, I rasped, my throat feeling like it was filled with sand. I walked in while your father was packing a suitcase for their spa retreat, she began, leaning forward. Elena was complaining that her favorite silk robe was wrinkled. Your father was literally on his knees, trying to steam it for her. I didn't say a word. I just handed him the audit notice and the DNA confirmation from your mother's vault. She paused, a small wicked glint in her eyes. Lily, I have seen men look ghost white before, but your father turned a shade of gray I didn't know existed. He laughed at first. He told me I was senile. He said, Elena is my daughter. She gets everything. And that's when the auditor stepped in. The auditor had explained the cold, hard math. Because my father had misappropriated funds meant for the Rose heir, me, to fund Elena's lifestyle, he was now in arrears to the estate for over $2 million. Since the house was part of the Rose lineage assets, and he had violated the equitable support clause, his right to live there had been revoked effective immediately. Elena started screaming, Grandma Clara continued. She called me a bitter old woman. She told your father to do something, but he couldn't do anything. He was too busy staring at the part of the document that proved he wasn't her biological father. The girl he had ruined you for, the one he had placed on a pedestal above your very life, she wasn't even his blood. The irony was a poison he had to swallow in front of everyone. My phone, sitting on the tray next to my bed, began to vibrate. It was a barrage of texts, not from my father asking if I survived surgery, but from Elena. You think you're so smart? You're ruining our lives. Dad is having a heart attack because of you. Tell Grandma to stop this right now, or I'll never speak to you again. I looked at the screen, then at the IV dripping into my arm. For years, that threat would have devastated me. Now, it felt like a gift. She says she'll never speak to me again, I told Grandma. Good,
Clara replied. Silence is much cheaper than a $2 million lawsuit. But the drama wasn't over. My father hadn't called yet. He was silent. And as any survivor knows, the silence before the storm is always the most dangerous part. He knew where I was. He knew I was defenseless in a hospital bed. And I knew, deep down, he wasn't going to go down without one last attempt to manipulate the strong daughter. The hospital room door didn't just open, it hit the wall with a hollow thud that made my heart monitor skip a beat. I expected my father to look broken, or perhaps even apologetic. Instead, he looked like a man who had lost a gamble and was looking for someone to blame for the debt. He stood at the foot of my bed, disheveled, his expensive tie crooked. Behind him, Elena was hovering in the hallway, her face puffy from crying, looking less like a golden girl and more like a ghost of the life we used to share. "You think this is funny, Lily?" he spat, ignoring the surgical drains and the paleness of my face. "You and your grandmother, playing games with legal papers while I'm trying to keep this family together?" "Family?" I whispered, the word feeling heavy. "You weren't keeping a family together, Dad. You were running a business where I was the silent partner and Elena was the CEO. Only it turns out I'm the owner." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. "I raised you. I gave you a roof. I don't care what some old letter from your mother says. You owe me 20 years of your life. You're going to call the lawyers. You're going to tell them it was a misunderstanding. You're going to sign over the management of the Rose estate to me, or so help me." "Or what?" Grandma Clara stood up from her chair. She was half his size, but in that moment she looked like a giant. "Or you'll walk away? You've already done that. You walked away when she was in pain. You walked away when she needed a father. You're only here now because the ATM has been shut off." Elena finally stepped into the room, her voice high and trembling. "Lily, please. They're saying we have to move out by the weekend. Where am I supposed to go? I have a brand reputation to maintain. I can't live in some apartment." I looked at my sister, the girl who shared my face, but none of my heart. I looked at the man who had spent 20 years making me feel like an inconvenience. "The surgery was a success," I said calmly, looking my father directly in the eyes. "The doctors say I'll be back on my feet in a few months. And when I am, I'm going to walk right into that house, my house, and I'm going to change the locks. You spent your life protecting a lie, Dad. Now you can go live in it." He lunged forward, reaching for the documents on my bedside table, but a security guard, one Grandma had wisely hired to stand outside, stepped into the doorway. The silence that followed was deafening. My father realized for the first time in his life that he had no power here, no money to throw, no guilt to weaponize. He backed away, his face twisting into a mask of pure resentment. "You're just like your mother," he hissed. Cold, calculating. "No," I replied, feeling a strange sense of peace. "I'm just like the girl you ignored. I learned how to survive without you a long time ago. This is just the paperwork catching up to the reality." As they were escorted out, Elena's sobbing echoed down the sterile hallway until the heavy doors swung shut, cutting the sound off entirely. Grandmother Clara sat back down and patted my hand. "Well," she sighed, "I think that went rather well. Now, let's talk about your physical therapy. We have a lot of work to do before you can host your first housewarming party." 3 months later, the morning sun hit the floorboards of the Rose estate in a way I had never noticed before. For the first time in 22 years, the air didn't feel heavy with the pressure of being perfect or the sting of being ignored. I walked across the living room, slowly and with a cane, but I walked. Every step was a victory the doctors said might never happen. The priceless moment Grandma had promised happened on the day of the final estate settlement. My father and Elena were forced to return one last time to collect their personal belongings under the supervision of the auditors. They expected a fight. They expected me to gloat. Instead, I just sat in my mother's favorite armchair, watching. My father looked aged, his expensive suit now hanging loosely on his frame. Elena was clutching a single designer suitcase, her eyes darting around the foyer of the home she thought she'd owned forever. "Lily," my father started, his voice lacking its usual thunder. "We found a small place across town. It's modest, But surely, as family, you could provide a monthly allowance? For Elena's sake, she isn't built for a regular job. That's when Grandma Clara stood up. She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket and pressed play. It was a recording from the day of my surgery, the audio of my father telling me he couldn't come because Elena had a brand emergency. The room went dead silent. My father's face turned a shade of purple that matched the bruises on my soul. "You asked about the price of family," Grandma said, her voice steady and sharp. "The price was a single hospital visit. You chose a spa day over your daughter's spine. In the Rose lineage, we don't reward bad investments. You aren't being cut off because of a legal loophole. You're being cut off because you've been bankrupt of character for 20 years. The look of pure, stuttering realization on their faces as they were handed the final eviction notice was worth more than every cent in the trust fund. They weren't just losing a house. They were losing the illusion of their own superiority. As they walked out the front door for the last time, I realized I didn't hate them. Hate is a heavy thing to carry, and I had enough hardware in my back to worry about. I felt light. I had my health, my grandmother, and a future I had written for myself. I looked at the empty hallway, then at Grandma Clara. "So," I smiled, "what's for lunch?" "It's your house now,"